It's a pleasure for TransUnion to be a lead sponsor for this event, the ninth annual Tech, and to have this conversation. And I think that, Tony, you're right. The scale on the skateboard, it's quite provocative around what's required. As a business in Africa, TransUnion's been around for 124 years. I haven't been there for all those years, Tony, just the last 7 or so years. When we talk about living in an age of agile, in the age of digital, we're going to talk about a world that's intrinsically digital. And what I'm going to do just over the next few minutes, because I'm going to give time for everybody has amazing content and demos, but I do have a vantage position in that we work with some 7,000 businesses in South Africa. We work with millions of consumers, and generally there's insights that are useful when we start to consider how we show up as insurtechs and as businesses generally. So over the next few minutes, it's not meant to be demoralizing or demotivating. We need to embrace the challenge that is in front of us. So my conversation over the next few minutes without slides is one part contextual as we go into our elections on the 29th of May, but also to think about what we're seeing. In our business, we have the advantage of seeing most FinTechs and insurtechs come around us. I've seen many businesses struggle from something we call mean time to commoditization. Also to share maybe what I'm seeing out there that could be useful. This is where it happens. This is the conversation, the provocation for us to be relevant. We all need to back each other and back this disruption for us to realize our economic potential. So let me start by giving you a couple thoughts. We still live in a country that's still highly unequal, right? Our unemployment is close on 32.1%. We'll have the new data just came out last week, published shortly, but unemployment is not in a great position, right? Our GDP growth has been lowered to sub 1% right now. And the tension is palpable. We can feel that there's challenges. Almost everyone's thinking, do we have a return to load shedding next week, Friday, on the 30th of May? And we all hope that things are systemically changing. But then I reflect as a guy that grew up in a township called Chatsworth. We're already 30 years into our democracy. And from my vantage point, we've come a long way. So you'll never hear me being pessimistic about Africa or the country we live in. I always have an optimistic lens given that we've come from nothing and there's so much more that lies ahead of us. So what is optimistic about this Africa that we sit in? A couple things. One, Africa still has the youngest population in any geographical region in the world. We currently make up 17% of the global population, growing by some 2 billion people between now and 2100, or which time will make up 40% of the world population. Around the corner from today in 2030, we'll have the largest global workforce. As Europe and North America start to fade out in terms of their aged population and the lower number of people that are giving birth to children, Africa has the highest replacement ratio in the world. So we'll have a large population growing that actually, if we get this right, start to think about how we can grow Africa economically, but also our population will start to grow economically by supporting the growth of other populations in the world. It's also important to know that all of this positivity, there are things that we need to get right as an African continent, right? There are a couple of things that plague us from being the superpower we should be. Having said that, we are highly successful already. Last year, the GDP of Africa was an entire percent higher than the world GDP. This year, that'll repeat itself. Amidst the challenges of corruption, a lack of accountability, and a lack of leadership, this conversation, which has a few people on the call, if we rally together as the private sector, working with government, working with academia, and we start to slowly get the wheels in motion, then the economic power that we believe will become as Africa is well within our grasp. So I fully believe that. And we're starting to see some of that in the data that we have access to at TransUnion. Every quarter, we run something called a consumer pulse survey. And in the last survey that we did, it was super interesting. The Gen Zs, these youngsters that are entering the workforce, the youngest population, our Generation Zs, are the most positive about South Africa and our future. Almost 80% of them believe that South Africa will turn the corner within the next 12 months. Now, one could argue that we're all signaling that on the back of the fact that we're on the top of the interest rate cycle and things are about to turn a corner. And when they turn, it will allow us to be a lot freer currently. But these young people are highly positive. When you talk about the challenges of South Africa, and it's important we think as insurtechs, what problems are we solving for? It's also the cool gadgets and the cool demos today. If we contextualize the problem in front of us, then you can start thinking differently about the economy. South Africa has 7.9 million unemployed people. We've got 13.4 million people that aren't economically active. We have 29 million people that take welfare grants from the government. 11 million took SRD grants during the COVID pandemic. Now, we need to find a way to systemically change how we approach growth in our country, dealing with broad-based issues like corruption, leadership, accountability. We all have a chance to vote next week. How do we vote and how do we start to grow our democracy even more mature as we go forward? Our number one problem that our business solves, which I think every single person on the call today will resonate with, is a topic called financial inclusion. When I talk about 13.4 million people being excluded from the economy today, that number ratchets up to 500 million across the African continent. I have businesses that I run in 8 different African markets. It's very similar. The challenges we face are highly similar. But if we can understand a world in Africa, as South Africa, where those people that are disenfranchised, either historically via circumstance or by design during the current disenfranchisement, if we can finally think of South Africa as a country of 65 million people and not just the 10 million or the 3 million that insurers want to go after, and suddenly we think of South Africa, that has hope, where we all have a better life for all of its people. So the number one thing that we're doing, and it's really exciting to share this with you, I've been here for 7 years and 4 months. The number one problem I sought to solve as a company is the problem of financial inclusion, not just for consumers, but I want to start with consumers for a second, because as insurtechs, I want you to think about what we're seeing, right? If you get all the data I've given you today, you're probably depressed enough to say, I'm quitting or finding another job. Stop for a second and think about what we could do to solve the problem of financial inclusion. What we do every single day, we judge. You've seen me for the first time today. Maybe you've judged me, whether you liked me or you didn't like me. But what you don't know is the hopes and the dreams that I had as a young kid that grew up in Chatsworth to where I'm now as a CEO of an African business. For the young kid that likes to access or wants to access their first car, or someone that would love to access an insurance product, except the product that we have is so irrelevant to the needs that they have as an individual. One of the biggest things that we've done over the last 6 or 7 years, working with the World Bank and the IFC and with regulators, is finding a way to use alternative data sets to better understand consumers, better understand their hope, better understand where they're going before it happens to them. Today I may be a person that's insurable, a person that you give finance to. Where am I going? What is the trend? What does my future look like? How do you find a way to give a chance to someone that would love access to your product, but by design, we work against you, right? Now, consumers are one part of the challenge. I would argue that if you look at all the data I've given you, your target population for a product that you're trying to sell has limits to it. The real opportunity is actually in what we call the small, medium, and micro enterprise sector, of which there are over 40 million businesses in sub-Saharan Africa. It's interesting that in the COVID pandemic in South Africa, over 1/3 of small and micro businesses shut down. Well, why do they shut down? They shut down because there's a lack of demand, a lack of cash flow, and we as businesses are very difficult to work with. What could be a quick decision takes hours, days, for which time their cash flow had dried up. How do you start to think about SMMEs differently? It's important because if we're only focusing consumers, there's a diminishing pool that you're going after. After you've captured the pool, you end up remarketing to drive traffic back to your businesses. But here's the trick with SMMEs. We figured this out a while ago using the analysis that we've done. Almost 70% of jobs in the African continent come from SMMEs, not from large businesses like today's sponsors or even a TransUnion. We're going to hire 70 people this year in our business. That's not nearly enough. Every SMME that's empowered to be successful hires between 3 and 5 different people. We need more small businesses, enterprises, going from startup to scale up to commercial to massive growth enterprises. The growth from our employment, right? The growth of our economy only works when our small business sector does. So a large part of the solution we think about as industry starts and ends with the word inclusion. How do you start to think about your products, not just for a certain segment that makes sense today? How do you take a bet on the future of South Africa, the future of Africa in an optimistic manner? So that's the background to why we are where we are as businesses, why we are as South Africa. Many people are quitting to move to different locations, Europe to North America. I want to be somewhere else, but yeah, here's the crazy part. I want to go nowhere. And I hope that you would agree with me that if we get this right, we will give rise to economic growth by empowering businesses, by empowering the consumers to be hashtag more than. We all want to be more than in our hearts, in our minds, but the solutions we build, the way we work has to change to be agile. And as you think about today's theme, as we think about thriving in the age of digital, the question for us starts with what do we do differently as businesses? How do we show up? What are we targeting? And if we have these old, archaic ways of working, then we are the snail that's on the ground. We're not the snail that's on the skateboard. We're going to think differently about how we show up. So for me, as a large business that's been around for 124 years, we've had to figure out how we become different. How do you become natively digital in a world where consumers want to buy things 24/7? If you don't know this, in the COVID pandemic, we lost control of the consumer. If someone says to you, Tony, that you own the consumer, you can call BS on that. We lost control in the pandemic. The fact that things are optimistic, if you think beyond the tips of our nose, things will definitely be positive. But as you think about this optimistic lens I've hopefully given you, it'll require us as businesses not to wait for government, because a lot of this we can do by ourselves, to think differently about how we thrive, how we think about the consumers, the citizens of South Africa and Africa thriving. And if you think differently about these challenges, then a few things happen. One, you start to think about a population of 65 million South Africans. You start to think about 1.4 billion Africans growing by another 2 billion over the next 80 or so years. And suddenly we've got the addressable market. We've got a population that's thriving, that's engaging. Right now, these physical separations keep us apart. The connectivity in Africa, the mobile first approach, there's 515 million unique smartphone users on the African continent. We've got to think differently about how we show up in this space. But a huge part of today is to think positively about the Africa and South Africa you want, and to ask yourself, when we think about thriving in a world like today, it starts with you. You're the only person that you can control as the individual on the call. You set the vision, the clarity of purpose for your business, and that purpose is going to think more than the dire circumstances you find yourselves in. How do you think differently about choices in the world that will become positive over a period of time? And if you do make the right choices, then growth, revenue, margin, expansion, geographies, these are all available to you. That's my hope for you. Not everything that you want to do has to start from nothing. Think about partnerships. Think about big insurer partnering with small insurer, partnering with fintech. Collaboration is something South Africans aren't really good at. We are so focused on being myopic around protecting our rights. Places like Kenya, Rwanda, Ghana, Uganda, these are all so collaborative. And my view to all of you as I wrap up, Tony, is the Africa we desire for ourselves is well within our grasp. And any person that you can control is yourself. And you can lead your teams into a vision, into a purpose, into a strategy that sees the positive that I see as leader of our business. And if we all can do that, then guess what? The Africa we desire is only a hop, skip, and a jump away.